Joining me now, military analyst, retired Air Vice Marshal Sean Bell. Sean, great to see you. Talk us through just what happened. We learned about this yesterday and how significant it is that they're going to be stationing these weapons there in Belarus.
Sounds quite alarming whenever we're talking about nuclear weapons, the rhetoric. In addition to signing the deal and, of course, those extra aircraft, they're also positioning Iskander missiles, which are capable of carrying the warheads. And, of course, Russia's got to find storage facilities in Belarus. They're going to build those. They'll be ready by July. But it's worth remembering that these weapons will still be under Russian control, even though they're forward deployed. I'm old enough and ugly enough. The former Soviet Union, when it was around, when it collapsed, a lot of the weapons, the nuclear weapons, were forward deployed. And by 1996, weapons that have been deployed in Belarus, Kazakhstan and Ukraine were all back on Russian soil again. So actually, this move of forward deploying it to Belarus is just reversing that trend. It's also worth noting the Americans say they're monitoring the situation, but they say there's no evidence whatsoever that Russia is planning to use nuclear weapons.
Interesting sort of relaxed response. I'm sure the Poles will be wondering a little bit more nervously about things like that. Talk us through, though, some of the other thought processes. What else is happening behind the scenes to lead to this decision by the Russians? Well,
Russia has a huge nuclear arsenal. It's got nearly 6,000 nuclear weapons. They can blow the world up several times over. They can be launched from air, land or sea, from the bombers there, from submarines or from land base. And, of course, over the years, it's become less worried about range. They use intercontinental ballistic missiles, so they can be based anywhere. So the fact that they're forward deploying these is actually irrelevant from a military perspective. So this is almost certainly about messaging. It's worth remembering Russia is not doing well in the war in Ukraine. There's a bit of sabre rattling. But if we look back to this month's visit by Xi Jinping, he made very, very clear to Putin at the time, you know, this is it's not about, he should not deploy or use nuclear weapons in this conflict. So I think actually the bigger worry here is almost certainly for Belarus. Bizarrely, because Russia's made really clear, Putin certainly, he wants to re-assimilate Belarus back into the former Russian Empire. They've been deploying troops forward. They've been mounting operations out of Belarus. They've now got aircraft out of Belarus, and they're now looking at mounting tactical nuclear weapons there. So it's a real worrying sign, I think, for Belarus.
Also, is there an aspect that Vladimir Putin's making this announcement for his domestic audience?
Almost certainly. I mean, yesterday, this interview, OK, it was on a state-owned TV channel, so it was all carefully managed. Very confident Putin talking about the West will never be able to sustain its level of support. And also, we're going to have 1,600 brand new main battle tanks in Russian hands by the end of the year. But if you look at the facts behind that, US economy is 10 times the size of Russia. The collective UK, France, Germany is 5 times the size of the Russian. And therefore, it's easily got the capacity. And in terms of how they're going to build the tanks. Russia's only factory building tanks can build 20 a month. They're losing 150 a month. It's very difficult to see how they'll do the maths. And even Russian commentators are turning around and saying they're going to have to open the cupboards, bring more out of storage, and even potentially bring the T-34 out of storage. That's the 1940s that was first brought into service. Has no place on the battlefield whatsoever. Shahed 136 drones, 71 used from Iran. Big pauses because Russia's running out. And I think despite the rhetoric that Putin's coming out with, Russian industry is struggling. And Russia is increasingly reliant on its importing weapons from its few friends.
Just quickly going back to this timing of this decision to say they're going to station these weapons in Belarus. Any surprise that it came after he'd met with President Xi? Something that President Xi would have said, yes, OK, you can have my tacit approval to do something like that?
I think it's much simpler than that, to be brutally honest. I think we've seen on the battlefield that Putin's going from offence to defence. He would have hoped to have got further, particularly around Bakhmut. And I think now he's really worried about what Ukraine is going to do on their counter-attack. And therefore, he's trying to sabre-rattle to try and scare the Western community. Because without Western aid, Ukraine's counter-offensive would be very difficult to mount.
Really interesting.